In ancient Celtic and Gallo-Roman religion, Cernunnos or Cernunnos is a god depicted with antlers, seated cross-legged, and is associated with stags, horned serpents, dogs and bulls. He's usually shown holding or wearing a torque and sometimes holding a bag of coins or grain and a cornucopia. He is believed to have originally been a proto-Celtic god. There are more than 50 depictions and inscriptions referring to him, mainly in the northeastern region of Gaul. The Gaulish form of the name Cernunnos is Karnonos, from the stem karnon, which means horn or antler, suffixed with the augmentative no, is characteristic of theonyms. Karnon is cognate with Latin cornu and Germanic kerno. The etymon karn, horn, appears in both Gaulish and Galatian branches of continental Celtic. Hesychius of Alexandria glosses the Galatian word karnon as Gallic trumpet, that is, the Celtic military horn listed as the carnix by Eustathius of Thessalonica, who notes the instrument's animal-shaped bell. The root also appears in the names of Celtic polities, most prominent among them the Carnutes, meaning something like the horned ones, and in several personal names found in inscriptions. Maya states that the etymology of Cernunnos is unclear, but seems to be rooted in the Celtic word for horn or antler, as in Karnonos. Cernunnos is believed by some Celticists to be an obscure epithet of a better attested Gaulish deity. Perhaps the god described in the Interpretatio Romana as Mercury or Dispater, which are considered to share Cernunnos' psychopomp or chthonic associations. The name has only appeared once with an image when it was inscribed on the Nautai Parisiaci, the sailors of the Parisii, who were a tribe of Gauls. Otherwise, variations of the name Cernunnos have also been found in a Celtic inscription written in Greek characters at Montagnac, Herol, as Carnoni in the dative case. A Gallo-Latin adjective, carnuatus, horned, is also found. Due to the lack of surviving Gaulish literature regarding mythologies about Cernunnos, stories with various possible epithets he might have had, or information regarding religious practices and followers, his overall significance in Gaulish religious traditions is unknown. Interpretations of his role within Gaulish culture vary from a god of animals, nature, fertility and prosperity to a symbol of authority, strength, unyielding endurance and virility. He has also been portrayed as a god of travel, commerce and bidirectionality, or associated with crossroads, the underworld and reincarnation, symbolizing the cycle of life and death. The only evidence which has survived consists of inscriptions found on various artifacts. The Nautai Parisiaci monument was probably constructed by Gaulish sailors in 14 CE. It was discovered in 1710 within the foundations of the Cathedral of Notre-Dame de Paris, site of ancient Lutetia, the civitas capital of the Celtic Parisii. It is now displayed in the Musée National du Moyen Âge in Paris. The distinctive stone pillar is an important monument of Gallo-Roman religion. Its low reliefs depict and label by name several Roman deities such as Jupiter, Vulcan and Castor and Pollux, along with Gallic deities such as Isus, Smertrios and Tarvos Trigarinus. The name Cernunnos can be read clearly on 18th century drawings of the inscriptions, but the initial letter has been obscured since, so that today only a reading, Cernunnos, can be verified. Additional evidence is given by one inscription on a metal plaque from Steinzell Relent in Luxembourg in the territory of the Celtic Treveri. This inscription read Deo Ceruninco, to the god Dieruninkos, assumed to be the same deity. The Gaulish inscription from Montagnac reads Alet Einos Carnonu Alisonteas. Aletinos dedicated this to Carnonos of Alisontea, with the last word possibly a place name based on Alicia, service tree or rock. Compare Alesia, Gaulish Alicia. Cernunnos on the Pillar of the Boatmen from the Musée National du Moyen Âge in Paris, France. On the Pillar of the Boatmen, we find an image depicted with stag's antlers, both having torques hanging from them with the inscription of Cernunnos with it. The lower part of the relief is lost, but the dimensions suggest that the god was sitting cross-legged in the depiction traditionally called Buddhic posture, providing a direct parallel to the antlered figure on the Gundestrup cauldron. Iconography associated with Cernunnos is often portrayed with a stag and the ram-horned serpent. Less frequently, there are bulls, dogs, and rats. Because of the image of him on the Gundestrup cauldron, some scholars describe Cernunnos as the lord of the animals or the lord of wild things, and Miranda Green describes him as a peaceful god of nature and fruitfulness who seems to be seated in a manner that suggests traditional shamans who are often depicted surrounded by animals. Other academics such as Cicero Serith describe Cernunnos as a god of bidirectionality and mediator between opposites, seeing the animal symbolism in the artwork reflecting this idea. The Pilier des Nords links him with sailors and with commerce, suggesting that he was also associated with material wealth, as does the coin pouch from the Cernunnos of Rheims and the stag vomiting coins from Niederkorn Turbalslag in the lands of the Treveri. The god may have symbolized the fecundity of the stag-inhabited forest. Other examples of Cernunnos imagery include a petroglyph in Val Camonica in Cisalpine Gaul. The antlered human figure has been dated as early as the 7th century BCE or as late as the 4th. Two goddesses with antlers appear at Besançon and Clermont-Ferrand, France. An antlered god appears on a relief in Cirencester, Britain, dated to Roman times, and appears depicted on a coin from Petersfield, Hampshire. An antlered child appears on a relief from Vendœuvres, flanked by serpents and holding a purse and a torque. The best-known image appears on the Gundestrup cauldron found on Jutland, dating to the 1st century BCE, thought to depict Celtic subject matter, though usually regarded as of Thracian workmanship. Among the Celtiberians, horned or antlered figures of the Cernunnos type include a Janus-like god from Candelaria, with 2 faces and 2 small horns, a horned god from the hills of Rio Tinto, and a possible representation of the deity Vestius Aloniacus near his altars in Lorizan. The horns are taken to represent aggressive power, genetic vigor, and fecundity. Possible reflexes in insular Celtic. There have been attempts to find the Cern root in the name of Conall Cernach, the foster brother of the Irish hero Cuchulainn in the Ulster cycle. In this line of interpretation, Cernach is taken as an epithet with a wide semantic field, angular, victorious, prominent, though there is little evidence that the figures of Conall and Cernunnos are related. A brief passage involving Conall in an 8th century story entitled Tyne Bo Freich, the cattle raid on Frach, has been taken as evidence that Conall bore attributes of a master of beasts. In this passage, Conall Cernach is portrayed as a hero and mighty warrior who assists the protagonist Frach in rescuing his wife and son and reclaiming his cattle. The fort that Conall must penetrate is guarded by a mighty serpent. The supposed anticlimax of this tale is when the fearsome serpent, instead of attacking Conall, darts to Conall's waist and girdles him as a belt. Rather than killing the serpent, Conall allows it to live and then proceeds to attack and rob the fort of its great treasures the serpent previously protected. The figure of Conall Cernach is not associated with animals or forestry elsewhere, and the epithet Cernach has historically been explained as a description of Conall's impenetrable horn-like skin, which protected him from injury. Possible connection to Saint Cieran, god of Étangsur Aru, a possible depiction of Cernunnos. He wears a torque at the neck and on the chest. 2 snakes with ram heads encircle him at the waist. 2 cavities at the top of his head are probably designed to receive deer antlers. 2 small human faces at the back of his head indicate that he is tricephalic. Musée d'Archéologie Nationale, the National Archaeological Museum in France. Rock carving of an antlered figure in the National Park of Nacquan, Italy. Some see the qualities of Cernunnos subsumed into the life of Saint Ciaran of Saigir, one of the 12 apostles of Ireland. When he was building his first tiny cell, as his hagiography goes, his first disciple and monk was a boar that had been rendered gentle by God. This was followed by a fox, a badger, a wolf, and a stag. Neopaganism and Wicca. Within neopaganism, specifically the Wiccan tradition, the horned god is a deity that is believed to be the equal to the great goddess and syncretizes various horned or antlered gods from various cultures. The name Cernunnos became associated with the Wiccan horned god through the adoption of the writings of Margaret Murray, an Egyptologist and folklorist of the early 20th century. Murray, through her witch cult hypothesis, believed that the various horned deities found in Europe were expressions of a proto-horned god, and in 1931 published her theory in The God of the Witches. Her work was considered highly controversial at the time, but was adopted by Gerald Gardner in his development of the religious movement of Wicca. Within the Wiccan tradition, the horned god reflects the seasons of the year in an annual cycle of life, death, and rebirth, and his imagery is a blend of the Gaulish god Cernunnos, the Greek god Pan, the Green Man motif, and various other horned spirit imagery. Cernunnos was the Gaelic god of beasts and wild places. Often called the Horned One, Cernunnos was a mediator of man and nature, able to tame predator and prey so they might lie down together. He remains a mysterious deity as his original mythos has been lost to history. Though Cernunnos himself appeared primarily in ancient Gaul, similar characters have been found around the world, including in other Celtic regions. Cernunnos was an ancient Gaelic word meaning horned or horned one. The name shares its etymology with similar words across the Celtic world, including several Gallo-Roman cognates. The use of cern for horned was common in Indo-European languages, such as the Greek corn, the word unicorn, referring to the one-horned horse-like creature, and several Latin taxonomic terms for antlered animals. In contemporary scholarship, Cernunnos has become a name used for other Celtic horned gods whose names have been lost to history. There is little evidence to suggest that the name Cernunnos was used outside of Gaul. Nevertheless, academic and religious scholars alike have used the name as a kind of catch-all for Celtic horned gods as well as horned deities as far afield as India. Other titles have been added to Cernunnos over time, often by modern neo-pagans such as Lord of the Wilds or God of Wild Places. Such titles have no historical basis but have come into popular usage with the rise of neo-pagan traditions. Little is known of Cernunnos, for almost nothing was written about him. He was a god of wild places and often appeared as a bearded man with antlers. Some scholars believed his name and characteristics originally belonged to a number of horned gods that were then mixed together. Others have suggested Cernunnos' traits were taken from Greco-Roman deities of similar appearance. In any case, it is best to remember that these gods were not necessarily the same entity, but instead emerged from similar cultural origins. Cernunnos was a god of the wild who ruled over pristine nature and uncivilized ways. Animals were his subjects and free-growing fruits and vegetables his bounty. Classical depictions of the deity included gatherings of animals such as elk, wolves, snakes, and aurochs. Such gatherings were possible thanks to Cernunnos' ability to bring natural enemies into peaceful communion with one another. This ability may have cast Cernunnos as a protector and provider amongst rural tribes and hunters. Similarly, Cernunnos may have been a fertility god or god of life. In some classical societies, the natural world was the origin of all life. Under this schema, the god of the wilds would also have served as a god of life, creation, and fertility. Depictions of Cernunnos often show him with a torque, a traditional Celtic necklace made of metal. In some depictions, he merely holds one, while in others he wears them either on his neck or antlers. Some scholars have connected Cernunnos to oak trees, which served as prominent symbols in Celtic lore and druidry. Cernunnos began a particularly active second life in the 19th century when spiritual movements seeking to revive pre-Christian European beliefs grew in popularity. The deity appeared prominently in Margaret Murray's The God of the Witches as the embodiment of horned deities. The text stated that Cernunnos was the god of witches during pre-Christian times, and that his worship continued in secret pockets throughout Europe following the spread of Christianity. Despite the book's problematic nature and many generalizations, particularly in regard to Cernunnos, it did bring the horned god back into the public eye. Cernunnos, the horned god of neo-pagan traditions, is lord of both life and death. He grows old as the year progresses before being reborn and starting the cycle anew. He exists in tandem with the divine feminine, the goddess, who is at once both mother and lover. In many traditions, his power stems from her. Note that Cernunnos' neo-pagan attributes do not necessarily reflect his pre-Christian characteristics. Cernunnos was a particularly mysterious deity. His name appeared only once in historical sources, and none of his tales have survived from antiquity. Modern scholars and neo-pagans have nevertheless attributed a number of tales to the horned god. Historical Cernunnos. The name Cernunnos has appeared only once on the Pillar of the Boatman. Carved in Paris sometime during the 1st century CE, the pillar depicted a number of Roman and Gaelic gods, Cernunnos among them. In this depiction, Cernunnos' torques hung around his antlers rather than his neck or hands. While it is unknown which tribes might have worshipped Cernunnos, it is clear that horned gods were commonly worshipped throughout the Celtic world. The most famous image of Cernunnos, which may not depict him at all, was found on the Danish Gundestrup cauldron. Dating back to the 1st century BCE, the cauldron was believed to have originated near Greece, likely in Gaul or Thrace, due to the art style and metallurgic practices required to create it. The horned god depicted on the cauldron bore similarities to those seen on Celtic stones, statues, and books during the early Christian period. Cernunnos may have an etymological link to Connacht Cernac, a character from the Ulster cycle. Connacht Cernac's name may have simply meant triumphant, but could also mean angular or cornered, given its similar etymology to Cernunnos. There were few similarities between the characters, however, and their names may be related simply by chance. Some scholars have connected Cernunnos to the legend of Herne the Hunter, a character that first appeared in Shakespeare's The Merry Wives of Windsor. After committing a great offence, Herne killed himself to avoid dishonouring himself. He then proceeded to haunt the forest, terrorising animals that crossed his path. Since the 19th century, scholars have attempted to find verifiable evidence that this story predated Shakespeare. While no irrefutable evidence has been found, some claim it nevertheless exists in the form of a Celtic or Anglo-Saxon legend that originated in Windsor. Horned gods were a popular image in world mythology, as many shamanic cultures used sympathetic magic to appear as the animal whose attributes they wished to take. When shamans wished to take on the attributes of a deer and elk, they would wear the animal's fur and antlers. Cernunnos' closest analogues in world mythology were Pan and Silvanus from the Greco-Roman world. Pan and Silvanus were horned gods, most commonly depicted with goat-like features, who ruled the wild places of the world. The Greeks and Romans would have closely associated the two. Cernunnos was also closely connected to the Germanic Wotan, a variant of the Norse god Odin. Wotan was the leader of the wild hunt, a horned god who led spirits on hunts for powerful warriors and the spirits of the dead. Wotan was also closely related to animals, and in some cases even served as their lord. It is unclear if these similarities to Cernunnos are intentional or simply mere coincidence. Some scholars believe that along with Pan, Cernunnos may have inspired the enemies of the Knights Templar to create Baphomet, a false deity or demon they were accused of worshipping. Baphomet displayed physical similarities to both deities, and his name was a corruption of a Latinized form of Muhammad. Baphomet has since become a prominent figure in modern witchcraft and satanic religion.